I worked 41 years in the same place. Same coffee, same desk, same jokes in the break room. People called it stability. I called it endurance. I never complained, never climbed too high, never sank too low. I did my job, raised my kids, paid the mortgage. And when the day finally came, the day I turned in my badge and cleared out my drawer, I thought someone might say something. They didn't. A few handshakes, a sheet cake. Vanilla with "Congrats, Walter" in blue frosting. Someone misspelled my name, Walter, with 2 L's. My name only has one. At home, I opened a folder I'd kept in the back of my closet for over 2 decades. Inside were pages of notes, napkin scribbles, printouts from the early internet, ideas. One in particular I'd circled a dozen times. Refinish old tools, personalize them, sell to collectors. I had this dream, small, quiet, of restoring vintage hand tools, planes, hammers, wrenches, polishing brass, oiling handles, carving initials for grandfathers and sons. Not flashy, not big, but mine. My neighbor Rick came over a few days after I retired. He's 10 years younger, wears golf polos like armor. "So what's the plan, Walt?" he asked. "Gonna hit the cruise circuit? Start bird watching?" I told him about the tools. He laughed. "Man, that's cute. Let me know how that retirement hobby works out. You want some advice? Just relax. You've earned doing nothing." I smiled politely, but inside something sparked. Not anger. Clarity. I didn't want to relax. I wanted to build. So I cleaned out the garage, ordered supplies, watched tutorials until midnight. I bought rusted tools from estate sales, spent hours scrubbing, sanding, restoring. Posted one on Etsy, then another, then 5. First month, 2 sales. Second, 20. By the 6th month, I had a wait list. Rick dropped by again. "So, still polishing your screwdrivers?" he asked, smirking. I showed him the screen. Orders from all over the country. Customs. Corporate gifts. Wedding sets. His mouth tightened. I didn't say much, because the work was speaking for me now. I started waking up at 6 a.m., not because I had to, because I wanted to. Coffee, news on low volume, then straight to the garage. What used to be a dusty side space was now my sanctuary. I organized shelves, labeled bins, installed soft lighting above the workbench, hung up a sign I carved myself. "Still working, just for me." One day I posted a short video of my process. 30 seconds. Before and after. Rust to shine. Silence to history. It went viral. Not in a fireworks way, but in a slow, steady rain of comments and emails. This reminds me of my dad. "I still have my grandfather's chisel. Can you restore it? Do you offer gift boxes for Father's Day?" I didn't just say yes. I built them. Rick stopped by again. This time, he didn't mock. He hovered near the garage doorway, eyeing the walnut-handled mallet I had just finished. "So, this is turning into something." I nodded. He hesitated. "Think there's room for another guy in the game?" "I've been thinking about flipping vintage golf clubs." There it was, the shift. I smiled. "Start small, and don't do it for attention." He didn't like that answer. But I wasn't giving advice. I was telling the truth. I reinvested every dollar I made, bought better tools, nicer wood, started writing little cards to include in each order. Not "thank you for buying," but something more personal. "This hammer once belonged to a man who built homes by hand. May it continue the story." People shared those cards online. Soon, I was shipping to Europe, then Japan, then Canada, It wasn't just a side gig anymore. It was a brand. Walton Steel. That's what I called it. Because everything I'd ever done before had felt soft. This had weight. I got my first interview request around month 8. A small podcast about handmade craftsmanship. I almost said no. I didn't think of myself as a story. Just a guy with sandpaper and time. But the host, a woman named Jenna, asked one question I couldn't ignore. Did you always know you'd do this? And I said the first honest thing that came to mind. No, but I always hoped someone would ask me what I wanted before I got too old to answer. After the episode aired, orders doubled. People started sending not just tools, but letters, photos, memories. My father saw, I haven't touched it in 20 years. This belonged to my mother. She was the only woman on her construction crew. I thought it was junk. Now it feels like legacy. I didn't just fix tools. I restored stories, and people paid for that. Gladly. Rick stopped by again, this time with a gift bag. Inside was a bottle of whiskey and a little note. To Walt, the guy who made retirement look like a promotion. I poured us 2 glasses. He looked around the garage like it was a museum. You know, when you first told me about this idea, I thought, he's going to tinker until he gets bored. He paused. You didn't get bored. I smiled. Turns out the thing that made me tired wasn't the work. It was never doing the work I loved. That night, I sat down and ran the numbers. I had passed $100,000 in gross sales in under a year. My pension covered my bills, but this was something else. This was freedom. I was invited to speak at a local trade school. Woodshop students, mostly young men in worn flannel and steel-toe boots. I wore the same shirt I used in the garage. No script, no slideshow. I just held up a battered wrench. This belonged to a man named Ellis. He built barns in the 1940s. His grandson sent it to me wrapped in a towel. Said it smelled like tobacco and memories. They laughed softly. You can make a living out of anything, as long as you give it meaning. When I was done, a student raised his hand. Did you do all this before retirement? I smiled. No, son, I saved it for retirement. That quote went viral. Someone made a graphic. It spread on social media. Then came the flood of new customers and copycats. One site tried to steal my brand, Steel and Walt, logo, product names, even my story slightly reworded. I could have sued. Instead, I sent them a single message. If you think you can fake my passion, you're not my competition. They shut down a month later. By year 2, I'd hired my first assistant, a young woman named Tasha. Bright, funny, smelled like cedar and courage. She knew how to handle blades better than most men I'd met. Rick invited me to his backyard one evening. Grill, music, beer. He introduced me to his friends. This is Walt. He retired and built a company in his garage. Taught me everything I know. I chuckled, but I remembered. He once laughed at the idea. Now he was retelling it like it had always been genius. That's how it works sometimes. People mock what they don't understand until they see it work. One day I got an email that didn't look like the others. No mention of tools, no praise, no request. Just a subject line, coffee. It was from Hannah, my daughter. We hadn't talked properly in a year, not because we fought, because she thought I'd checked out after retirement. She wanted me to move closer, take up bingo nights, join a retirement group. But I chose the garage instead. She took it personally. We met at a quiet diner off Highway 7. She was already seated, still wearing her work badge, still in control. So, you're famous now? She asked, half smiling. Barely, I said. We talked awkwardly, then honestly. She admitted she thought I'd fade after Mom passed. But you didn't. You changed. Maybe I just came back to who I was before everything else. She nodded, then reached into her bag, pulled out a wrapped box. Inside was one of my old screwdrivers from when I was 22. I kept it. I wanted to give it back to you in case you forgot how far you've come. I didn't cry, but I didn't speak for a long time either. That night, I polished that screwdriver until it gleamed. Then I placed it above my workbench, centered between all the others. It didn't need to be sold. It was the first one I'd ever saved. I began writing short notes about each tool I restored. Not just serial numbers or woods used, but stories. This plane was owned by a father who taught 3 sons to measure twice. This hammer survived a flood and still split cedar like butter. This chisel belonged to no one famous, but it made cabinets that lasted 80 years. I published them in a small booklet, sold it for $5 with every order. Customers emailed to say they read it out loud to their kids. This wasn't just commerce, and I had finally learned you don't need to make noise to leave a mark. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a package, not a neighbor. It was a woman in her early 30s, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a worn tool belt. Her name was Erin. She said she followed my work online, that she restored furniture, and that she was tired of being the only girl at the table. I want to learn how to restore tools the way you do, not for money, for meaning. I let her in. She picked up a rasp and turned it over like it was a sacred object. We worked in silence for an hour. At the end of it, she asked if I was taking apprentices. I wasn't, but I said yes. Erin came every Saturday. Tasha called her fresh steel. They were different. Tasha moved quick and precise. Erin moved slow and deep. They started teaching each other, and I just watched, marveling that I, a man who spent decades alone at a desk, had become the kind of person others gathered around. I bought a second workbench. Then, by spring, we weren't just a garage. We were a studio. We named the space the Grain Line, because every piece of wood, like every person, has its own direction. You can't force it, you follow it. That summer, we held our first open day. Families, former clients, local artists, people flew in from as far as Oregon, Maine, even Canada. Some brought tools for us to see. Some just wanted to shake my hand. One man, maybe 70, stood near the door for an hour before approaching. He held a small hand drill, wrapped in a cloth. This was my wife's father's. I never knew what to do with it after he passed. I looked at it, then looked at him. Want to restore it together? His eyes filled. We sat, 2 old guys, 1 tool and a memory. By the end of the hour, it shined again. He said nothing, just nodded. But that nod said everything. I still wake up at 6 a.m., still grind my beans by hand, still write 1 sentence a day before I touch a tool. You're not done. Not because I believe I'll live forever, but because I want to show up for every day I have left. Rick retired again, this time from golf coaching. He stops by sometimes, still brings cigars. Last time, he walked around the studio with his hands in his pockets, then said, "You didn't just build a business, you built something that didn't exist before." I nodded. He looked like he wanted to ask for advice, didn't, and I didn't offer. Because some people come into your story just to spark it, not to share it, and that's okay. Tasha moved on to start her own brand. She named it Iron and Ink. She sends me photos of her shop once a month. In her last message, she wrote, "You didn't just teach me restoration. You taught me how to build my own name." I stood in the middle of my studio recently, alone. Sue, I could see the grain in the oak I'd been saving for something special, and I realized this was it. This whole thing. Not a product, not a post, but this moment. Quiet, strong, alive. I reached for the screwdriver my daughter gave back to me, held it in my palm. It still had the small nick on the handle from when I dropped it in 1981. That nick mattered, because it meant it had been used, like me. At the end of every tool I restore, I sign a small mark inside the handle, a tiny letter W etched with a hot pin. Most people never see it, but I know it's there, because stories aren't meant to be loud, to be true. Some of the best ones are hidden in the grain.